Millionaire asked for one maid, but all fled upon seeing the castle. Until one accepted and changed everything. Claire gripped the suitcase handle tightly as the bus pulled away, leaving her alone before the black iron gates that rose like a barrier between her and her only hope. The newspaper ad had been clear: seeking a housekeeper to work at a property in the countryside, excellent salary, no experience necessary. What it didn't mention were the rumors circulating through the city of Charlotte about Colonel Theodore Blackwood's mansion, and why no one could manage to work there for more than 3 days. The rain began to fall when she rang the bell, and through the bars she could see the imposing structure that looked more like a European castle lost amid the sugarcane fields. Tall towers rose against the grey sky, and the dark windows seemed like empty eyes watching her arrival. Claire swallowed hard, remembering the reason that had brought her there. Her mother, Mrs. Dorothy, had been in the public hospital for 2 weeks, and the doctors had made it clear that without the private treatment, which cost over $5,000 a month, she wouldn't have much of a chance. "Who's there?" A rough voice came from the intercom, filled with irritation. "Claire Anderson, sir. I'm here for the housekeeper position." A long silence followed before the gate opened with a metallic creak that cut through the air like a groan. She walked along the path of uneven stones, noticing how the gardens, though well kept, had something melancholy about them. The roses were too perfect, as if someone arranged them obsessively to make up for some greater absence. The main door opened before she even reached it, revealing a tall, imposing man with perfectly combed grey hair and blue eyes that focused on nothing. Theodore Blackwood wore expensive clothes, a cream linen suit that contrasted with the paleness of his skin, and he held a dark wooden cane. At 60, he still maintained the upright posture of someone used to commanding, but there was something broken in his expression that made Claire feel an unexpected pang of compassion. "Another one," he said, turning and walking inside without waiting for a reply. "I suppose you'll run off too when you hear the first thunder." Claire closed the door behind her and followed the man through the marble hallways, observing how he moved with precision despite his blindness. The walls were covered in old portraits and paintings of rural landscapes, but there were empty spaces where clearly other works had been removed. The silence in the house was almost tangible, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing through the vast space. The last 15 housekeepers didn't even last a week. Theodore stopped before a tall window, though he obviously couldn't see through it. They all claimed the house had something strange, that they couldn't sleep with the noises during the storms. "What kind of noises, sir?" He turned slowly toward her, and for the first time his unfocused eyes seemed to try to find hers. "Screams, crying, things breaking. They say I go mad when it rains." Claire observed the man before her, noticing how his hands trembled slightly as he held the cane. There was a vulnerability in his posture that contrasted with the authoritative tone of his voice, as if he were testing whether she would be another to abandon him. "Do you really go mad?" she asked simply, without fear in her voice. The direct question seemed to surprise him. Theodore remained silent for a moment before forming something that might have been a bitter smile. "Perhaps I lost my sight 10 years ago, in a car accident. Since then the storms bring me difficult memories. And your family?" His face hardened instantly. "I have no family." The answer, too quick, too defensive, revealed exactly the opposite. Claire had grown up in a house full of secrets and knew how to recognize when someone was trying to hide a deep wound. She decided not to press, at least not yet. Theodore led her through the main rooms of the mansion, explaining their functions and routines with the precision of someone who had repeated those instructions many times recently. The house was too big for one person, with 15 bedrooms, 3 living rooms, a huge library, and a kitchen that could serve a restaurant. Claire noticed that, although everything was impeccably clean and organized, there was a museum-like air to the property, as if real life had stopped long ago. "Your room is on the 2nd floor near the main staircase," he said, as they climbed the marble staircase with its mahogany railing. "There is an intercom for emergencies. My meals should be ready at 7 in the morning, noon, and 7 in the evening. I don't like variations in the schedule." "Understood, sir. And there is one absolute rule." He stopped in front of a closed door in the hallway. "This room remains locked. Never enter here, no matter what happens." Claire looked at the dark wooden door, noticing how perfectly polished it was, without even a speck of dust, as if someone cleaned it every day, despite it never being opened. "May I ask why?" "No." The answer was sharp, final. He left her in her room, a comfortable space with old but well-maintained furniture, a window overlooking the gardens, and a small table where she could have her meals. Claire placed her single suitcase on the bed and sat down, trying to process everything she had just witnessed. The salary offered was truly excellent, 3 times more than she could get anywhere else, but she was beginning to understand why the other maids had fled. There was something in the atmosphere of the house that weighed on the shoulders like a damp cloak. It wasn't fear of the supernatural, but something more human and painful. A sadness so deep it seemed to have seeped into the very walls. Claire had experienced her own share of sadness, especially in the last months watching her mother waste away in the hospital, but here it was different. It was an old, crystallized sadness that refused to heal. When she went down to prepare Theodore's dinner, she found him sitting in the library, his hands resting on a pile of papers he obviously couldn't read. She approached slowly, noticing how he seemed lost in distant thoughts. "Sir, dinner will be ready in 40 minutes. He lifted his head as if he had forgotten her presence. "You're not leaving?" "Why? Did I do something wrong?" "It hasn't rained yet," he said simply. It always rains on the first day, as if the house itself tests people. As if his words had power over the weather, the first thunder echoed in the distance. Theodore stiffened immediately, his hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. Claire observed the transformation, seeing how the controlled man from minutes before began to fall apart. "Perhaps it would be best if you went to your room," she suggested gently. "No." His voice came out hoarse. "I can't. It's when they come." "Who comes?" But Theodore was no longer listening. The second thunder was louder, and with it came the rain, beating against the tall library windows with an intensity that made the glass vibrate. The man stood up abruptly, knocking the papers to the floor, and began to pace back and forth like a caged animal. "Emily!" he suddenly shouted, making Claire jump. "Emily, where are you?" The rain intensified, and with it, Theodore's despair. He began stumbling through the furniture, searching for something or someone that clearly wasn't there, his cane hitting uncontrollably against the bookshelves. Claire understood that this was the moment when all the other maids had fled. Instead of running, she approached slowly, speaking in a soft, calm voice. "Mr. Theodore, it's me, Claire. You're at home, you're safe." He turned toward her voice, his face twisted in anguish. She's gone, and it's all my fault." "Who's gone?" "My daughter." The confession came out as a sob. "She left 2 years ago and never came back." Claire felt her heart tighten. Suddenly, everything made sense. The house too big for one person, the locked room, the sadness that permeated every room. This was the home of a father who had lost his daughter, and guilt was slowly consuming him. She moved even closer, ignoring the fact that he might push her or hurt himself in the confusion. "Would you like to talk about her?" The simple question seemed to anchor him in the present moment. Theodore stopped walking and leaned heavily on an armchair, his breathing still irregular but no longer desperate. "Emily, she was 23 when she left." "What was she like?" "Beautiful, smart, stubborn like her mother." His voice took on a softer, more melancholic tone. "She took care of me after the accident. She was my nurse, my companion, my reason to keep living." "And why did she leave?" The following thunder was deafening, making the windows vibrate violently. Theodore flinched as if he had taken a physical blow. "Because of me. It was all my fault." Claire stayed by his side throughout the storm, which lasted almost 3 hours. Gradually, she managed to calm him, bringing him back to reality whenever he began to get lost in painful memories. When the rain finally stopped, he was exhausted, but more stable. "You didn't run away," he said, almost surprised. "No, sir." "Why?" Claire thought about the question for a moment. Because you were suffering, and I understand suffering. That was the first victory of trust between them. Theodore said nothing more that night, but the next day his behavior was different. Less hostile, more willing to engage in small talk during meals. Claire took advantage of these openings to get to know him better, discovering that he had built an empire in agribusiness, that he loved classical music, and that, before the accident, he traveled the world on business. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. It was during the second week that Claire discovered more details about Emily. While cleaning the living room, she found a photo frame face down behind a flower vase. When she straightened it, she saw a beautiful young woman with brown hair and expressive eyes, smiling next to a younger Theodore with his eyes still focused. They were hugging in front of the mansion, clearly happy. "You found the photo." Theodore's voice made her jump. He had entered the room silently, as he always did. "Sorry, sir, I was just cleaning and—" "Don't apologize. I'm the one who hides it every time someone new arrives. I can't stand people looking at her with pity." Claire studied the photo more closely. "She looks like you, the same determined eyes. Too determined sometimes." Theodore sat down heavily in a nearby armchair. She was always independent ever since she was little. When her mother passed away 15 years ago, Emily took on responsibilities no child should have. She took care of you, of me and the house. She was good in her studies, but she turned down all offers to study in other cities. She said she couldn't leave me alone. His voice carried a mix of pride and regret. I should have insisted she go. I should have been stronger. Claire put the photo back in its place, but this time left it visible. "Can you tell me what happened?" Theodore remained silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with ancient pain. "She fell in love with a young man I didn't approve of." "Why?" "Nathan Carter, son of one of my tenants. Good kid, hard-working, honest." Theodore paused, as if the next words were poison in his mouth. "But poor. And I had other plans for Emily." Claire began to understand the magnitude of the tragedy. "You opposed the relationship?" "Worse than that. I forbade it, threatened to fire his family, take away the house they'd had on the property for 3 generations. Theodore covered his face with his hands. "I used my power, my influence, to separate 2 young people in love. What stupidity, what damned pride. And Emily? She obeyed me. For a while, stopped seeing him, at least openly. But I knew she was suffering, saw it in her eyes, in how she withdrew from me." His voice cracked slightly. "And then came the accident." Claire sat in the armchair across from him, sensing they were reaching the heart of the wound. "What happened?" "I found out they were still meeting in secret. Someone told me they'd seen them together in town. I was furious, drove out in the rain to find Nathan and give him one final ultimatum." Theodore took a deep breath, as if needing courage to continue. "Crashed my car into a tree on the way to his house, lost my sight and nearly lost my life. And Emily? She saved me. Was with me in the car, trying to convince me to turn back home. She came out with just a few scratches, but had to watch them pull me from the wreckage unconscious and bleeding." Silent tears streamed down his face. "When I woke up in the hospital, blind forever, the first thing I heard was her voice saying everything would be okay, that she'd take care of me." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "And Nathan?" "Never saw him again. Or rather, could never see him again. Emily never brought it up again, devoted herself entirely to caring for me. For 2 years she was my eyes, my nurse, my companion, sacrificed her youth for a stubborn father who was blind in every way. Then why did she leave?" Theodore stood abruptly and walked to the window, though he couldn't see through it. "Because even after all that happened, even blind and dependent on her, I still couldn't accept that she loved Nathan, kept making comments, insinuations, making it clear that if she wanted a life of her own, she'd have to choose between him and me." The confession hung in the air between them like a sacred admission. Claire understood Theodore had spent the last 2 years reliving this guilt every day, especially during the storms that reminded him of the night of the accident. "Have you heard from her?" "A note. left in my room on a Monday morning. Theodore recited the words as if he'd memorized them. Father, I can no longer choose between you and my happiness. I need to live my life. Perhaps one day you'll understand. Emily. Nothing else? Nothing. For 2 years. He returned to the armchair, suddenly looking much older than his 60 years. Sometimes I think she might be trying to contact me, but I instructed the front desk staff not to put through calls from unknown numbers. I'm afraid. Afraid of what? That she hates me. That she just wants money. That it's to tell me she never wants to see me again. Claire watched this broken man, finally understanding why the other housekeepers had fled. It wasn't out of fear of ghosts or hauntings, but because his pain was so intense it contaminated the atmosphere. It was difficult to be near someone carrying so much regret without trying to help, and attempts to help meant getting emotionally involved. She decided she would get involved. That night, after Theodore retired to his quarters, Claire went up to the second floor and walked slowly to the locked door he had shown her on the first day. She didn't try to open it, just placed her hand on the polished wood and tried to imagine what that room would be like. Emily's room preserved exactly as she had left it. In the following days, Claire began to notice details that had gone unnoticed at first. Small signs that Theodore held on to hope that his daughter would return. Her place always set at the table, a specific type of cookie that only she liked always present in the pantry, fresh flowers placed weekly in a vase at the entrance of the house. She also noticed that he had a very specific routine on Tuesday afternoons. He would disappear for a few hours and return with red eyes, as if he had been crying. When she discreetly asked where he went, he murmured something about visiting the past and changed the subject. Claire's curiosity grew until it became almost an obsession. She began to discreetly research the family, asking town merchants about the Blackwoods. She discovered that Theodore had been one of the most respected men in the region, that his wife, Margaret Ann, had been a woman beloved by all, and that Emily was known for her kindness and intelligence. It was during one of these conversations that she learned about Nathan Carter. The town butcher, Mr. Harold, had known the family for decades and said that Nathan was truly a good young man who had worked since childhood to help his parents, and that his love for Emily was known by everyone in the area. A shame the Colonel didn't accept it. Mr. Harold shook his head sadly. She was a good girl, but she suffered greatly from the separation. After her father's accident, she was never the same again. Do you know where Nathan went? He moved to Charlotte, got a job at a school there. But I heard he still hasn't married, you know, as if he were waiting for something. This information planted a dangerous seed in Claire's mind. What if Nathan was also suffering from the separation? What if both, father and daughter, were trapped in their own prisons of pride and hurt, unable to take the first step toward reconciliation? During her third week of work, Claire had her first real clue about Emily's whereabouts. She was organizing the papers in Theodore's office when she found a letter returned by the mail, still sealed. The sender's address was crossed out, but she managed to decipher it. Emily Blackwood Carter, with an address in Charlotte. Carter. She had married. Claire stared at the letter for a long time, her heart racing. Theodore had tried to contact his daughter, but the correspondence was returned. Why? Had she moved, changed her name, or simply refused to accept letters from her father? That night, during another storm, Theodore had another severe episode. This time, however, he spoke more, revealing details he hadn't shared before. Among the shouts and despair, he mentioned that he dreamed of Emily every night, that sometimes he heard her voice calling for him, that he kept his phone always charged, hoping she would call. She tried to come back, he said in a pause between the thunder, his voice broken. 6 months ago, I saw car lights at the gate late at night, but when the security guards went to check, there was no one there. I'm sure it was her. Why didn't you go down to see? Because I'm a coward. The answer was simple and devastating. I'm afraid she only came to tell me she hates me. I'm afraid she's happy without me. I'm afraid of finding out I've lost my daughter forever. Claire stayed by his side all night, and when the storm finally passed, she had made a decision. She could no longer just watch that man destroy himself with remorse. Theodore needed to know the truth about his daughter, even if it hurt. The next day, she requested time off for personal matters and took the first bus to Charlotte. She had the returned letter's address and an iron determination to find out what had happened to Emily. The trip took 2 hours, and throughout the journey, Claire wondered if she was doing the right thing. She was meddling in family affairs that didn't concern her, risking a job she desperately needed. But something stronger than prudence drove her. Maybe it was the memory of her own mother in the hospital, maybe it was compassion for a suffering father, or maybe it was just the certainty that some wounds only heal when exposed to light. The address led her to a modest middle-class neighborhood with small, well-kept houses. House number 247 was painted light blue, with a small porch where some plants created a welcoming atmosphere. Claire took a deep breath and rang the bell. The woman who opened the door had graying hair tied in a loose bun and kind eyes behind reading glasses. She must have been about 50 and wore an apron over a simple dress. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Emily Blackwood. I mean, Emily Carter." The woman's expression changed immediately. "She doesn't live here anymore. If this is about bills or some mail..." "No, ma'am, I work for her father." "I work. Theodore Blackwood." The mention of the name made the woman step back, her expression closing off completely. "We want nothing to do with him." "Please, just a few minutes. I'm not here to cause trouble." The woman hesitated, looking at Claire with suspicion. "Are you the new maid?" "Yes, ma'am, Claire Anderson." "How many weeks did you last?" The strange question confused Claire. "I'm still working there. It's been 3 weeks." That seemed to surprise the woman. 3 weeks, even with the storms?" "Yes, ma'am." The woman studied her for another moment before moving away from the door. "Come in, but be quick. Nathan gets home from work in an hour, and he mustn't see you here." Claire entered the small but cozy house, immediately noticing the photographs on the walls. Emily was in several of them, more mature than in the photo she'd seen at the mansion, hugging a dark-haired man with kind eyes who could only be Nathan. In one of the more recent pictures, she appeared holding a baby. She had a son, Claire murmured, surprised. "My grandson, Benjamin. He turns 1 next week." The woman followed her gaze to the photo. "I'm Mrs. Ruth, Nathan's mother. And before you ask, no, the maternal grandfather has never met the child." Claire felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Theodore was a grandfather and didn't know. Emily had married, started a family, and he was completely alone, suffering in his empty mansion. "Where are they now? Why do you want to know? What does that man intend to do?" "Mrs. Ruth, Mr. Theodore is very ill, not physically, but emotionally. He suffers every day for having lost Emily. If you could see him..." "Good." The reply came full of bitterness. "He deserves to suffer after what he did to my children." "What did he do?" Mrs. Ruth sat down heavily in an armchair, suddenly looking tired. "He tore apart 2 young people in love, humiliated my Nathan, threatened our family. And when they finally had the chance to be together, he still managed to ruin everything." "How?" "After the accident, Emily took care of him for 2 years, sacrificing her own life. When she finally gathered the courage to leave home and marry Nathan, that man made her feel guilty for abandoning him blind and alone." Mrs. Ruth shook her head in disgust. "She came here on the wedding day crying, saying she couldn't be happy knowing her father was suffering because of her. But she got married anyway?" "Yes, but she was never completely happy, always feeling guilty, always wondering if she had done the right thing." The woman's voice softened. "Nathan tried several times to convince her to look for her father, to attempt a reconciliation. He's a good man, my son. He holds no grudges." "And her?" "Emily tried. 6 months ago, when Benjamin was born, she went to the mansion. She wanted to show her grandson to her father, to try to start over." Mrs. Ruth paused, her expression growing even sadder. "She waited at the gatehouse for 2 hours, but he never came down to see her. The security guard said the boss was sleeping and couldn't be disturbed." Claire felt a wave of anger and compassion at the same time. Theodore had lied. He knew Emily had gone looking for him, but pride and fear kept him from coming down to meet her. How many misunderstandings, how much unnecessary suffering. Where do they live now? Why do you want to know? Mrs. Ruth became suspicious again. Because I need to tell the truth to both of them. Mr. Theodore doesn't know he has a grandson. Emily doesn't know that her father almost goes crazy with sadness every time it rains, screaming her name. Claire leaned forward, appealing directly to the woman's heart. Mrs. Ruth, these are two people who love each other, but are destroying their own lives out of pride and misunderstandings. Someone needs to do something. The woman remained silent for a long time, studying Claire as if trying to decipher her true intentions. Why do you care? You're just a maid. Because I know what it's like to suffer. My mother is in the hospital, maybe doesn't have much time, and I understand the value of family. Claire swallowed hard. And because no child should grow up without knowing their grandfather, especially when that grandfather is desperate to meet them. Mrs. Ruth stood up and went to a desk in the corner of the room, from where she took a piece of paper and a pen. They live in a rented house in the uptown neighborhood. Nathan teaches at a public school, and Emily works part-time at a library. She wrote the address in careful handwriting. But I'm warning you, if you're lying, if this is some kind of trick from that man to cause more suffering to my children, I'll go to the mansion myself and deal with him. It's not a trick, Mrs. Ruth. It's a desperate attempt to fix a family that was broken by mistakes and pride. Claire took the paper with the address, thanked her, and prepared to leave, but Mrs. Ruth's voice made her stop at the door. She still cries sometimes, you know, when she thinks no one is watching. Emily still loves her father even after everything. The trip to the uptown neighborhood took 40 minutes by bus, and throughout the journey, Claire tried to organize her thoughts. How to approach a woman she didn't know to talk about the father she had left. How to explain Theodore's pain without seeming like she was defending someone who had caused so much suffering. The house was small, with a simple facade painted light yellow. There was a child's bicycle on the porch and baby clothes drying on the clothesline. Claire took a deep breath and rang the doorbell, hearing the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. The woman who opened the door looked exactly like in the photos, but with a new maturity in her face. Emily had the same expressive eyes she had seen in the portrait at the mansion, but now they carried a mix of happiness and melancholy that made her beauty even more striking. She wore a simple t-shirt and jeans with her hair in a messy ponytail and held a dark-haired baby who watched her curiously. "Can I help you?" Emily asked politely, but Claire saw the exact moment she noticed something familiar in her face. "You work for my father." It wasn't a question. Emily had inherited the same sharp perception as Theodore. Claire nodded slowly. "Claire Anderson. And yes, I've been working for your father for 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Emily seemed genuinely surprised. But how? The storms. I stay with him during the storms. Emily studied her for a long moment, then moved away from the door. "Come in. Nathan shouldn't be long, but I think we need to talk." The inside of the house was cozy and full of life, the complete opposite of the mansion. There were toys scattered on the floor, family photos on the walls, a small table with school papers spread out. Emily pointed to the sofa and sat across from her, settling the baby on her lap. "This is Benjamin," she said, with a smile that couldn't completely hide the sadness. "My son. He's beautiful." Claire observed the child, seeing traits of both Emily and the man from the photos. "Your father would love to meet him." Emily's expression closed off immediately. "My father made his choice 2 years ago." "Did he really? Or did you assume what you thought was his choice?" "He never tried to find me." "Emily, may I call you that?" Receiving a nod, Claire continued, "Your father told me about the night you went to the mansion 6 months ago." "He told you?" The surprise was genuine. "He knew you were there. He saw the car lights." "Then why didn't he come down?" "For the same reason you didn't insist, fear." Emily placed Benjamin in a baby seat and stood up, walking to the window. "Fear of what?" "He was always the bravest man I knew." "Fear that you hated him. Fear that you had only gone there to confront him. Fear of finding out he had lost you forever." "That's ridiculous." Emily turned around, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I just wanted to show my son to his grandfather. I wanted to try to start over. And he just wants you back. Emily, your father is destroying himself with guilt and loneliness. Every storm, he has terrible episodes where he screams your name and searches for you throughout the house. Stop. Emily covered her face with her hands. I don't want to hear this. Why? Because it hurts? Because it makes you feel guilty? Claire stood up, her own emotion showing. Your father made terrible mistakes, yes. He separated you from Nathan out of pride and prejudice, but he's been paying for it for years. You don't understand. Emily turned to her, the tears finally falling. It's not just about his mistakes. It's about what I had to sacrifice. 2 years of my life taking care of him, watching Nathan from afar, pretending I felt nothing. 2 years feeling guilty every time I thought about my own happiness. And now? Are you happy? The simple question seemed to completely disarm Emily. She sat down heavily on the sofa, her hands trembling slightly. I should be. I have a wonderful husband, a beautiful son, a life I always wanted. But every night I dream of my father alone in that big house. Every time Benjamin laughs, I think about how my father would love to hear that sound. Every time it rains, I remember the attacks he had when I was little and Mom had just passed away. Emily sobbed softly. How can I be completely happy knowing he's suffering? Claire sat beside her and in a risky decision touched her hand. Then why not try again? What if he rejects me? And what if you still can't accept Nathan? What if you can? What if you two are wasting the best years of your lives because of misunderstandings that could be resolved with an honest conversation? Before Emily could answer, the sound of a key in the door was heard. A man entered carrying a school bag, greeting cheerfully until he noticed Claire's presence. Nathan was exactly like in the photos, but in person he radiated a genuine kindness that explained why Emily had chosen to fight for this love. "Honey, who's our visitor?" he asked. But when his eyes met Claire's, his expression changed. "You work for him." "Nathan," Emily began, but he was already approaching with a cautious expression. "What does he want now? Wasn't humiliating my family enough?" "Nathan," she came on her own. Emily stood up, positioning herself between them. "She was telling me about my father. And what is there to tell? That he finally regrets being a tyrant? That now that he's old and blind, he wants his family back?" The anger in Nathan's voice was controlled but intense. Claire realized that he carried his own wounds, humiliations he had never fully overcome. He doesn't know you got married, doesn't know he has a grandson, doesn't know Emily tried to visit him. Claire spoke slowly, watching Nathan's expression gradually change. "He lives like a man who has lost everything and has no hope of recovering anything." "Good," Nathan said, but without the same conviction. "Nathan!" Emily scolded him. "No, Emily, I won't pretend I feel sorry for him." Nathan turned to Claire. "Do you know what that man told me the last time we met? He said I would never be worthy of his daughter, that I'd better forget she existed and look for a girl of my class. That was 10 years ago, but I still remember every word." Claire saw the old pain in his eyes and understood why reconciliation would be so complicated. It wasn't just about Theodore and Emily. Nathan also needed to forgive. "And you? Were you able to forget her?" "Obviously not." "Why?" Nathan looked at his wife and son, his expression softening. "Because true love isn't forgotten, even when we try." "Then maybe that's what your father-in-law finally understood. That true love isn't forgotten, nor controlled." The silence that followed was filled with tension and possibility. Benjamin started to whimper, and Emily automatically picked him up, the maternal movement breaking something in Nathan's resistance. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice softer. "A chance for all of you. Your father-in-law is consumed with remorse, Emily is torn between happiness and guilt, and you're carrying an anger that only hurts yourself." Claire stood up, feeling she had planted the seed she could. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or instant reconciliation. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that everyone made mistakes and that maybe it's time to try to fix things." Emily and Nathan looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Emily spoke. I want to try. I can't live with this guilt anymore, and I don't want Benjamin to grow up without knowing his grandfather. Emily, Nathan began, please, my love, for our family, for our peace of mind. Nathan sighed deeply, running his hand through his hair. Okay, but with conditions. He can't humiliate you again. First offensive word and we leave. Agreed. Claire felt a wave of hope. May I suggest the meeting be on neutral ground first? A public, casual place? Where? There's a town square downtown near the library where Emily works. Tomorrow is Saturday. It will be busy, but not uncomfortable. They settled the details. Saturday at 2 in the afternoon at the town square. Claire returned to the mansion with a racing heart, knowing the hardest part was yet to come, convincing Theodore to go. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. She found Theodore in the library, sitting in his usual armchair with a darker expression than normal. You left without telling me. I had to take care of something important, sir. Related to what? Claire took a deep breath. It was now or never. Related to your daughter. Theodore stiffened completely, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. I told you not to meddle in personal matters. I know where she lives. I know she got married. I know she has a son. Stop. His voice came out hoarse. Your grandson's name is Benjamin. He turns 1 next week. Stop. She tried to visit you 6 months ago, but you didn't come down to see her. Theodore stood up abruptly, knocking some papers off the nearby table. Who do you think you are to dig through my life, to reopen wounds that can't be healed? Someone who cares, someone who sees you destroying yourself every day and can't just stand by watching anymore. You don't understand anything! He began pacing agitatedly around the library. Emily hates me. She only came here that night to tell me in person that she wants nothing more to do with me. That's a lie, and you know it. The direct accusation made him stop. How dare you? Because I spoke with her today. She cried, Mr. Theodore. She cried when I told her about your suffering. A daughter who hates her father doesn't cry upon hearing he's not well. The information hit him like a physical blow. Theodore leaned heavily on a bookshelf, his breathing uneven. You spoke with Emily. I did. And with Nathan, too. They want to try for a reconciliation. Impossible. But his voice no longer carried the same conviction. Why impossible? Because I don't deserve it. The confession came out in a whisper. I made terrible choices. I separated 2 young lovers out of stupid pride. I caused unnecessary suffering. I lost my daughter because I couldn't accept that she had a right to her own happiness. Claire approached him slowly. And you think punishing yourself for the rest of your life will fix anything? At least I won't cause more pain. Mr. Theodore, look at me. She gently touched his arm. You are causing pain. To Emily, who feels guilty for being happy while you suffer. To Nathan, who sees his wife torn between her current family and her father. To Benjamin, who's growing up without knowing his grandfather. What if I try and she rejects me? What if you try and it all works out? Theodore remained silent for a long time, various emotions playing across his face. Fear, hope, regret, love. What do they want from me? A conversation, a chance to start over. Where? At the town square, tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. A public place, he observed, understanding the choice. Neutral ground. Exactly. Theodore walked to the window, his posture revealing the internal conflict. What if I can't find the right words? What if my pride speaks louder? Then you might lose the only real chance to have your family back. The implicit threat worked. Theodore turned to her, and for the first time in weeks his blind eyes seemed focused. Will you come with me? If you want me to. I need you to. I don't trust myself not to ruin everything again. Claire felt a wave of responsibility and terror. She had orchestrated this meeting, and now its success or failure partly depended on her. All right. But Mr. Theodore. Yes? This time, let your heart speak louder than your pride. That night, Theodore barely managed to sleep. Claire heard him pacing his room until late hours, probably rehearsing what he would say to his daughter. She herself couldn't rest, mentally going over all the ways the meeting could go wrong. On Saturday morning, Theodore appeared at breakfast more dressed up than usual. He had shaved carefully, combed his hair meticulously, and wore a navy blue suit that enhanced his still imposing figure. But his hands trembled slightly as he brought the coffee cup to his lips. "Am I doing the right thing?" he asked for the 10th time. "You're doing the only thing you can do. Try." At 1 o'clock, they left the mansion. Theodore had insisted on going by car, driven by his personal driver, William, a middle-aged man who had worked for the family for decades. During the 15-minute drive to the city, Theodore remained silent, his hands clasped in his lap, his face a mask of contained nervousness. The town square was a charming spot in the city centre, with wooden benches under leafy trees, an old fountain in the centre, and the historic church in the background. On Saturday afternoons, it was usually bustling with families strolling and children playing, which provided exactly the casual atmosphere Claire had envisioned. They arrived a few minutes before 2. Claire chose a bench with a good view of the entire square and instructed Theodore to sit in a relaxed manner. He, however, was clearly tense, his hands gripping the cane with unnecessary force. "Are they going to come?" he asked for the 4th time in 5 minutes. "They will," Claire replied, although she also felt a pang of anxiety. What if Emily had changed her mind? What if Nathan had convinced her to give up? At 2 o'clock sharp, she saw them arriving from the opposite side of the square. Emily was pushing a stroller and walking slowly, clearly nervous. Nathan was beside her, a protective hand on his wife's back, his expression cautious. They stopped about 10 meters from the bench, as if hesitating to approach further. "They're here," Claire murmured to Theodore, who stiffened even more. How do they look?" "Nervous, but they came." Claire stood up and discreetly waved to Emily, who returned the gesture before saying something to Nathan. The couple approached slowly, and for the first time, father and daughter were in the same space after 2 years of separation. "Father?" Emily's voice came out hesitant, filled with emotion. Theodore stood up so quickly he almost lost his balance. "Emily, it's me." For a moment, neither of them moved. Claire could feel the tension in the air, the weight of all the unspoken words, of all the accumulated regrets and hurts. Then, as if a dam had broken, Theodore reached out his hands toward his daughter's voice. "My girl, my dear girl." Emily approached and touched his hands, and it was as if the 2 years of separation instantly disappeared. Theodore pulled her into a desperate hug, and both began to cry silently. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything, for being stubborn, for separating you, for being a terrible father." "You weren't a terrible father." Emily pulled back enough to touch his face. "You made mistakes, but so did I. I should have tried to talk before leaving." "No. You did what you had to do. I should have accepted your choice from the start." Nathan remained a little apart, watching the reunion between father and daughter with a mix of emotions on his face. Theodore seemed to notice his presence and slowly turned toward him. "Nathan." "Mr. Blackwood." The silence between them was different from the silence between father and daughter. He carried years of resentment, humiliation, and hurt. Claire held her breath, fearing everything would collapse at that crucial moment. I owe you an apology," Theodore finally said, his voice strained with effort. "I was unfair to you. I said terrible things, used my position to humiliate you." "You did indeed," Nathan replied without hostility, merely stating a fact. Did you take good care of my daughter?" "I did, and I will keep taking care of her." "And do you love her?" "I do. More than my own life." Theodore nodded slowly. "That was all I should have asked 10 years ago, instead of judging your bank account." "Dad, we have a surprise for you," Emily said, pulling the stroller closer. "Your grandson, Benjamin." Theodore stood motionless as she placed the baby in his arms. Benjamin, with his curious dark eyes, watched his grandfather fearlessly, even smiling faintly when Theodore gently touched his face. "My grandson." Theodore's voice broke completely. "My beautiful little grandson." Benjamin babbled something and tried to grab Theodore's glasses, making everyone laugh through their tears. In that moment, watching 3 generations reunited after so much suffering, Claire felt she had done the right thing, even though she had taken a risk. Would you like to come home, to the mansion?" Theodore asked hesitantly. "Just to talk more calmly." Emily looked at Nathan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "For a few hours." The return to the mansion felt surreal for everyone involved. Claire watched Emily look at the house where she had grown up, as if seeing it for the first time, noticing changes and what remained the same. Nathan maintained a respectful but cautious posture, clearly out of his comfort zone in that luxurious environment. Theodore led them to the main room, where they sat in a way that felt strangely natural, as if the 2 years of separation had been just a few days. Benjamin was placed on a blanket on the floor where he happily crawled, exploring the new space. "The house seems bigger," Emily observed. "It seems empty," Theodore corrected. "It has felt empty since you left." "Dad." "No, let me speak." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "I spent 2 years tormenting myself, feeling like a victim of the situation. But the truth is, I created the whole situation. My pride, my prejudice, my inability to accept that you had the right to choose your own future. We all make mistakes," Nathan said, his first significant contribution to the conversation. "What mistakes did you make?" Theodore asked, genuinely curious. "I allowed your prejudice to affect me. For years I felt less worthy of Emily because of what you said. That created insecurities in our relationship that didn't need to exist." Nathan's honesty seemed to disarm Theodore's defenses further. "And now? Do you still feel that way?" "Sometimes. Mostly when I see Emily looking out the window with that sad expression, she thinks I don't notice." Emily turned to her husband, surprised. "You noticed?" "Always. And I knew you were thinking about your father." "Why did you never say anything?" "Because I was afraid that if I encouraged you to reach out to him, you'd discover I wasn't enough to make you completely happy." The confession brought a new layer of understanding to the reunion. Claire realized they had all been prisoners of their own fears and insecurities, creating barriers that didn't need to exist. "Nathan," Theodore said, his voice firmer, "may I ask you a personal question?" "You may." "What are your plans for the future? For your family?" "I want to give the best possible life to Emily and Benjamin. I'm studying for a civil service exam that could give me a better position, and we're saving up to buy our own house." He paused. "And I want my son to grow up knowing all his relatives, including his grandfather. Even after everything. Mr. Blackwood, holding a grudge is like carrying stones in your pocket. It only hurts the one who carries them." Nathan's simple wisdom seemed to touch Theodore deeply. "You've grown to be a better man than I ever was. Not better. Just different." Benjamin began to whimper and Emily picked him up, rocking him gently. The sight of his daughter caring for her own son brought tears to Theodore's eyes. "I've missed so much," he murmured. "The first steps, the first words." "He's still learning to walk," Emily said gently. "And he only says, Mama and Dada, for now. You can still be part of many things. Would you be willing to come here regularly? For dinners? Maybe weekends?" Emily and Nathan exchanged glances again, and Claire noticed there was a deep communication between them, built over years of relationship. "We'd like that," Emily said finally, "but with some conditions." "Name them." "No interference in our marriage or our decisions. Respect for Nathan and the life we've built." Her voice grew firmer. "And honesty. If something bothers you, you talk to us directly. Don't let resentment grow in silence." "I agree to everything." "And one more thing," Nathan added. "We want you to seek professional help to deal with the episodes during thunderstorms. It's not healthy, and now that Benjamin will be here sometimes, he shouldn't witness that." Theodore hesitated for a moment. "You're right. I should have sought help long ago." Claire watched the family slowly reconnecting, establishing new foundations for their relationship. It wouldn't be easy or immediate, but for the first time in months she saw real hope in Theodore's eyes. When the afternoon was well advanced, Emily and Nathan prepared to leave, but the atmosphere was completely different from the tension of their arrival. Benjamin had dozed off in his grandfather's lap during the last hour, creating an image Claire knew would be etched in everyone's memory. "Next Sunday?" Theodore asked hesitantly as they stood to go. "Next Sunday," Emily confirmed, kissing his forehead before leaving. After they departed, Theodore remained seated in the living room for a long time, an expression of peace on his face that Claire hadn't seen since she arrived. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For risking your job to do the right thing." Was it the right thing? It was the only right thing. He stood up slowly, suddenly seeming lighter. "Claire, I'd like to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "In the coming months, my life will change significantly. Emily and the family will be here regularly. I'll need to seek psychological help, perhaps make some renovations to the house to better accommodate a baby." He paused. "I'd like to count on you not just as an employee, but as a coordinator of these changes." "Coordinator? Someone to help me organize this transition, to assist me in becoming a better father and grandfather, who—" He smiled for the first time since she'd known him. "Who'll keep me from making the same mistakes again." Claire felt a wave of emotion. It would be an honor, and the salary would of course be adjusted to reflect these new responsibilities. That night, for the first time in weeks, there was no thunderstorm, and Theodore slept peacefully, without screams or nightmares. The entire house seemed to breathe more easily, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. In the following days, Theodore kept his word. She scheduled an appointment with a psychologist specializing in trauma and grief, began planning renovations to make the house safer for a baby, and most importantly, started talking about Emily without the devastating pain that used to accompany any mention of her. The following Sunday was magical. Emily, Nathan, and Benjamin arrived for lunch, and for the first time in years, the large dining table in the mansion was used for its original purpose, bringing a family together. Benjamin enjoyed exploring the gardens, always under the watchful eye of his grandfather, who seemed to rediscover the world through the child's eyes. During lunch, they talked about future plans. Nathan mentioned that he had passed the civil service exam and would receive a significant promotion. Emily revealed that she was considering going back to school, perhaps pursuing a graduate degree in library science. Theodore listened to everything with genuine interest, asking questions, offering support, but always respecting their decisions. "Dad," Emily said when they were having coffee on the porch, "there's something I'd like to ask. Anything. I want to better understand the accident. What really happened that night?" Theodore tensed up, but didn't shut down as he usually did when the subject came up. "Why?" "Because I still have nightmares sometimes, memory fragments that don't make sense. I think I never fully processed the trauma." Nathan took his wife's hand, offering silent support. Theodore looked at both of them, then at Benjamin, who was quietly playing with some toys they had brought. "It was raining heavily that night," he began, his voice controlled but filled with emotion. "I had found out that you were still seeing each other. Someone saw you together in the town square." "Who?" "Mr. George, who worked at the gatehouse. He thought he was being helpful by telling me." Theodore sighed deeply. "I was furious. Not with you, but with myself. I felt like I was losing control of the situation, that you were disobeying me." "And you left the house for what?" "To talk to Nathan, to give a final ultimatum. Either he disappeared from your life forever, or I would make his family's life impossible in the area." Nathan stiffened but said nothing. Emily squeezed his hand tighter. "You insisted on coming with me," Theodore continued. "You said that if I was going to threaten Nathan, I should at least have the courage to do it in front of you, that you were tired of secrets and manipulations. And on the way, we started arguing. You accused me of being controlling, of using my blindness to keep you prisoner. I said terrible things. I said you were being ungrateful, that after everything I had sacrificed for you, I deserved at least obedience. Dad, You said you weren't my property, that you had the right to love whoever you wanted. Theodore stopped, clearly struggling with the memory. And I said that if you chose Nathan over me, you would no longer be my daughter. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily had turned pale, and Nathan seemed to be controlling his breathing with effort. That's when I crashed the car, Theodore finished. I was so consumed by anger, so blinded by pride, that I didn't even see the curve. The tree was wet, the car skidded. You were driving? Nathan asked, confused. I still had partial vision before the accident, Theodore explained. I never told anyone this, but the total blindness was a consequence of the accident, not the cause of it. Emily stood up abruptly, walking to the porch railing. You never blamed me for the accident. How could I? It was entirely my fault. But I blamed myself. For 2 years, I blamed myself for insisting on going with you, for provoking the argument. Emily? Nathan approached her, but she raised her hand, asking for a moment. You both. She turned to face her father and husband. All these years, you've been carrying guilt that wasn't yours. Dad, you blame yourself for causing the accident. Nathan, you blame yourself for starting the argument. And I blame myself for insisting on coming along. And? Theodore asked gently. And maybe it's time we all stopped carrying this guilt. The accident happened. We spent years apart because of pride and fear. But we're here now, all alive, all with a chance to start over. Benjamin chose that moment to babble something that vaguely sounded like Grandpa, making everyone laugh and breaking the emotional tension of the moment. Indeed, Theodore smiled, reaching out to take his grandson. Perhaps it's time to focus on the future instead of the past. That Sunday set the pattern for those to come. Every week, Emily, Nathan, and Benjamin came for Sunday lunch at the mansion. Gradually, the visits extended to some weeknight dinners too. Benjamin got a crib at his grandfather's house and a growing collection of toys scattered through rooms that were once empty and silent. Theodore made significant progress with his psychologist. The episodes during storms became rarer and less intense. He learned breathing and grounding techniques that helped him stay in the present instead of getting lost in traumatic memories. Most importantly, he began to forgive himself for past mistakes. Nathan surprised everyone with his generosity of spirit. Far from holding grudges, he genuinely worked to build a relationship with his father-in-law. They discovered they had more in common than they thought. They both loved football. Both had a secret passion for history, and both were completely devoted to Emily and Benjamin. One day, about 2 months after the reconciliation, Claire found Theodore in the library, but this time he wasn't sitting alone. Benjamin was on his lap as he read a storybook aloud, creating different voices for each character. The child laughed delightedly at his grandfather's imitations, clapping whenever he recognized a funny sound. He's loving it, Claire observed, pausing at the door. Who knew I had a talent for storytelling? Theodore smiled. Emily always loved when I made up stories for her as a child. It seems Benjamin inherited the same taste. And how are you feeling? Complete. The answer came without hesitation. For the first time in years, I feel complete. That night, there was a particularly strong storm. Claire prepared for another difficult episode, but when she went to check on Theodore, she found him calm in his room, listening to classical music as the rain beat against the window. No episode today? She asked, relieved. No, the storms don't haunt me anymore, he explained. Now when I hear the rain, I don't think about the accident. I think about Benjamin laughing this morning when he tried to feed himself and made a mess. I think about Emily telling me about her plans to go back to school. I think about Nathan teaching me to use my phone so I can listen to the voice messages they send during the week. The good memories replace the bad ones? Exactly. It took me 60 years to learn that the best way to heal the past is to create new presents to remember. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Theodore's transformation was remarkable, but the change in the mansion itself was even more striking. The house that once felt like a mausoleum of sadness had turned into a living, welcoming home. The walls echoed with laughter instead of silence. The gardens were often occupied by family picnics, and the large kitchen was finally used to prepare meals that brought multiple generations together. Claire also noticed changes in herself. The work had become more than just a job. She felt part of that blended family. Theodore trusted her not only for household tasks, but for advice on how to be a better father and grandfather. Emily treated her like an older sister, asking for opinions on everything from recipes to personal dilemmas. Nathan respected her as the person who had made his family's reconciliation possible. During this period, Claire's mother also made significant progress. The private treatment, funded by the generous salary she received from Theodore, was paying off. Mrs. Dorothy wasn't cured, but she was stable and had a much improved quality of life. During one of her visits to the hospital, Claire brought pictures of Benjamin and told her about the family she had helped reunite. "You always had this gift," Mrs. Dorothy said, holding the photos tenderly. "Even as a child, you could make people understand each other. Remember when you made Mrs. Maria reconcile with her daughter after that terrible fight?" "That was 15 years ago, Mum. But it was the same talent. You see people's hearts. You see what they truly need even when they themselves don't know." This conversation planted an idea in Claire's mind, an idea that would grow and develop in the following weeks. In December, Benjamin celebrated his first birthday, and the party was held at the mansion. It was the first time in years that the property had received so many guests. Besides the immediate family, Nathan's parents were present, some close friends of the couple, and even some of the farm's longtime employees who had known Emily since she was a child. Theodore behaved like the perfect grandfather, organizing games for the children present, even though he couldn't participate visually, hiring clowns and making sure everything was perfect for Benjamin. The child obviously was more interested in playing with the gift boxes than with the gifts themselves, but that only made the party even more fun. During the party, Claire noticed how Theodore interacted naturally with all the guests. The bitter, isolated man she had met 6 months before had completely disappeared, replaced by someone genuinely interested in the people around him. "You performed a miracle," Nathan said, approaching her as they watched Theodore trying to teach magic tricks to a group of fascinated children. "I didn't perform any miracle. I just helped people who loved each other find their way back. That's the definition of a miracle." After the party, when everyone had left and Benjamin was sleeping in the crib that now stayed at the mansion, the family gathered in the living room to talk about the year that had passed and their plans for the next one. "Dad," Emily said, snuggling into the armchair beside him, "I have some news." "Good or bad?" "Good, very good," she smiled. "I'm pregnant again." The silence that followed was one of pure joy. Theodore sat still for a moment before starting to cry quietly. "Another grandchild? Or granddaughter? It's too early to tell." "When?" "August. Benjamin is going to get a little brother or sister." Nathan was smiling broadly, clearly happy to be able to share the news with the extended family. "We're thinking about names. If it's a girl, we'd like to name her Anne after Grandma." Theodore sobbed openly. "Margaret Ann would have loved that. And if it's a boy?" "We haven't decided yet. Maybe Christopher, if Claire doesn't mind the tribute." Claire felt her eyes fill with tears. Being honored in this way by that family, which had become so important to her, was more than she had ever dreamed of. It would be an immense honor. That evening, after Emily and Nathan had retired to the guest room that was now considered theirs in the mansion, Theodore asked to speak with Claire in private. "I need to tell you about a decision I've made," he said, leading her to the study. "What decision?" "Over the past few months, seeing how you've transformed not only my life, but the life of my entire family, I began thinking about other families who might be going through the same difficulties we faced." Claire wasn't sure where he was going with this. Families separated by pride, misunderstandings, lack of communication, parents and children who love each other but can't overcome emotional barriers. Theodore sat behind the desk. How many other Emilys are out there, trapped between love for family and the right to their own happiness? How many other Nathans are being judged by their background instead of their character? Many, I imagine. I would like to do something about it. Theodore opened a drawer and took out a folder full of documents. I've been talking with lawyers and accountants. I want to turn part of this property into a family support center, a place where families in crisis can receive psychological guidance, conflict mediation, practical support. Claire was speechless. And I would like you to be the general coordinator of the project. Me? But I don't have the qualifications for that. You have something better than academic training. You have the gift of seeing people's hearts and helping them connect. Theodore leaned forward. Naturally, we would provide all necessary additional training, family mediation courses, basic psychology, social project management. This is incredible. It's my way of giving back. For years, I used my wealth only for my own interests. Now I want to use it to help other families find the same kind of happiness you brought back to us. Claire looked out the study window, seeing the gardens illuminated by the full moon. 6 months earlier, she had arrived at that property desperate, needing a job to pay for her mother's treatment. Now she was being offered the opportunity to turn her experience into a life mission. When would we start? If you accept, construction of the center can begin next month. A separate wing of the mansion, but connected with therapy rooms, spaces for family mediation, an area for children. Theodore smiled. And naturally we would need to hire a team, psychologists, social workers, professional mediators. You would be responsible for coordinating everything. And the mansion? And your family? The mansion will remain our home. Emily and Nathan have already agreed to move here permanently after the second baby is born. Benjamin will grow up here, his parents will work here. Nathan has already accepted becoming the general administrator of the property. And you will continue being part of our family, in addition to coordinating the center. It was more than Claire had dared to dream. Her career with purpose, a family that loved her, and the chance to use her experience to help others. Do I need to give an answer now? No. Think it over carefully. Talk with your mother. Reflect on what you truly want for your future. Claire spent the next 2 weeks considering the proposal. She visited her mother in the hospital and told her about the opportunity. Mrs. Dorothy was thrilled with the idea that her daughter could turn her natural gift into a profession. You always knew you had a special purpose, she said, holding Claire's hands. Perhaps all of this happened exactly as it should. You needed to save one family to discover you could save many others. Claire also spoke at length with Emily and Nathan, wanting to make sure they were genuinely comfortable with the idea of sharing the property with a social project. Claire, you gave us back our father and grandfather, Emily said. If now you can do the same for other families, how could we be against it? And honestly, Nathan added, the idea of using our good fortune to help others is exactly the kind of thing that makes all of this even more meaningful. On Christmas Eve, Claire gave her answer to Theodore. Yes, she accepted leading the project. The news was met with an impromptu celebration. Theodore opened a bottle of champagne he had saved for years. Emily made an emotional toast, and even Benjamin participated, babbling happily while everyone celebrated. To the woman who taught us that family isn't about blood, but about love, forgiveness, and second chances. Theodore raised his glass. And who will now teach the same lesson to many other families? During the first quarter of the following year, the construction of the family center advanced quickly. Claire involved herself in every detail, from choosing the wall colors to designing the therapeutic gardens. At the same time, she began her supplementary studies, taking intensive courses on family mediation and applied psychology. The center was named Anne House, in honor of Theodore's wife and Emily's mother. The proposal was to offer a welcoming environment where families in crisis could receive professional support, but also a place where they could simply talk, eat together, and rediscover the bonds that united them. In March, they received their first family, a 65-year-old mother who had become estranged from her son after he married a woman she disapproved of. The situation was frighteningly similar to what had happened with Theodore and Emily, but with the gender roles reversed. Claire applied the same techniques she had used instinctively, listening without judging, identifying the real fears behind defensive positions, creating opportunities for meetings on neutral ground, and gradually building bridges of understanding. The success with this first family established Anne House's reputation. Within a few months, they had a waiting list of families wanting to participate in the programs. The team grew to include 2 psychologists specialized in family therapy, a social worker, and a professional mediator. Claire discovered she had not only a natural talent for the work, but also a genuine passion for it. Every reunited family, every repaired relationship, every child who smiled again in the presence of grandparents was a reward no salary could match. In August, when Emily's second baby was born, a beautiful girl named Helena, as planned, Anne House had already helped over 30 families overcome their differences and reconcile. Little Helena quickly became the princess of the mansion, spoiled not only by her grandfather and parents, but by the entire Anne House team. Gabriel, now an active boy of nearly 2, took on the role of protective older brother with adorable seriousness. "You created something beautiful," Theodore said one afternoon as they watched Gabriel teaching Helena to clap her hands in the Anne House garden. "Not just our family, but all these other families who now have a second chance." "We created it," Claire corrected. "This was only possible because you had the courage to admit your mistakes and the generosity to want to help others avoid making the same ones. And you had the courage to meddle in the affairs of a stubborn boss," he smiled. "It's a good thing you were stubborn too." At that moment, watching the children play as their joyful voices echoed through the gardens that were once empty and silent, Claire reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple job posting in the newspaper. She had arrived at the mansion desperate, needing only money to care for her sick mother. She could never have imagined that she would find not just a job, but a vocation, a family, and a life purpose, a life. The mansion that was once haunted by sadness now shone with joy. Theodore had transformed from a bitter, isolated man into the loving and involved patriarch he was always meant to be. Emily had finally managed to balance her love for her father with her personal happiness. Nathan had found not just acceptance but true respect and affection from his father-in-law, and 2 new generations would grow up knowing the value of forgiveness, honest communication, and unconditional love. But perhaps the most significant transformation was Claire herself. She had discovered that her ability to see beyond people's words, to identify their deepest emotional needs, and to build bridges between wounded hearts was not just a talent but a calling. Anne House continued to grow and expand its services. Claire developed specific programs for different types of family conflicts: parents and adult children, sibling conflicts, problems between in-laws, and even issues related to inheritance and family businesses. Each family that went through Anne House took with them not only reconciliation, but also the tools to maintain healthy relationships in the future. Claire always emphasized that forgiveness was only the first step. The real work was in building new patterns of communication and mutual respect. 3 years after the project began, Anne House had become a nationally recognized model. Claire received invitations to speak at universities, participate in family therapy conferences, and even write a book about her experiences. Throughout all this professional growth, she never lost sight of what really mattered: the people. Each family was unique, each situation required a different approach, and every victory was celebrated as if it were the first. On a particularly meaningful morning, 5 years after arriving at the mansion as a desperate employee, Claire was in her office at Anne House, reviewing the week's cases, when she heard familiar laughter coming from the garden. Through the window, she saw Theodore playing hide-and-seek with Benjamin and Anne, his cane abandoned against a tree, as he pretended to search for the children who were hiding behind bushes, obviously unsuitable for the purpose. "Grandpa, you're not looking right," Benjamin shouted, laughing. "I am looking, you're just too good at hiding," Theodore replied, deliberately looking in the wrong direction. Anne babbled something unintelligible but clearly happy, clapping her hands with satisfaction. At that moment, watching the scene through the window, Claire felt a deep sense of completeness. The mansion that was once known for repelling employees with its atmosphere of sadness had become a symbol of hope and renewal. Entire families came from other states to participate in Anne House's programs, and many of them corresponded with Claire years later, sharing important milestones in their reconciliation journeys. Theodore never had another attack during storms again. In fact, he had developed the habit of going out to the covered porch during heavy rains, listening to the sound of the water while reflecting on all the blessings in his life. Emily was pregnant with her third child, planning a large family in the mansion that now overflowed with life. Nathan had become not only the estate manager, but also one of the strongest advocates for Anne House, often sharing his own reconciliation story with families who arrived skeptical about the possibility of change. Mrs. Dorothy, now with stabilized health thanks to ongoing treatment, had moved into a small house near the mansion, where she received regular visits from her adoptive grandchildren, Benjamin and Anne, who affectionately called her Grandma Dorothy. During one of the family therapy sessions Claire was mediating, a father commented, "You make it seem so easy, as if wanting it was enough to solve everything." "It's not easy," Claire replied honestly. "True reconciliation requires courage to admit mistakes, humility to ask for forgiveness, and patience to rebuild trust. But it's possible. It's always possible when genuine love is involved." "How do you know?" Claire looked through the therapy room window, seeing Theodore pushing Anne on a newly installed swing, while Benjamin ran circles around them, shouting with joy. "Because I've lived through this transformation. Because I saw a family completely torn apart by pride and misunderstandings become stronger and more united than ever." She turned to the couple in front of her. "And because I believe if it worked for them, it can work for any family willing to try." That evening, during the weekly family dinner that had become a tradition at the mansion, Theodore made an announcement. "I have a proposal for you all." "What kind of proposal?" Emily asked, bouncing Anne on her lap. "I've been talking with some investors interested in expanding the Anne House concept to other cities." He paused dramatically. "Would you like to turn this into a national network?" The momentary silence was broken by Benjamin shouting "yes," without fully understanding what it was about, but feeling the positive energy of the conversation. "It's a big decision," Nathan observed. "It would mean much more responsibility, many more families depending on us, but also many more families being helped," Emily added, looking at Claire. "What do you think?" Claire thought carefully before answering. The idea was tempting but also frightening. Anne House had worked so well partly because it maintained an intimate, personal atmosphere. Would it be possible to replicate that on a national scale? "I think we need to be very careful," she said finally. "What makes Anne House special isn't just the programs or facilities. It's the fact that every family feels seen and heard as individuals, not just another case." "Exactly," Theodore nodded. "That's why the proposal includes an intensive training period for coordinators at each new unit, people who share the same philosophy, the same relationship-centered approach." "And would you be willing to lead this training?" Nathan asked Claire. "It would be an honor, but only if we can guarantee that every new Anne House maintains the same standards of care and personal attention we've developed here." The discussion continued throughout the evening, with everyone contributing ideas about how to expand without losing the project's essence. Benjamin eventually fell asleep on the sofa, and Anne was put to bed in her crib, still murmuring contentedly, but the adults kept planning late into the night. End of story. And now, dear listeners, we've reached the end of this touching story about Claire, Theodore, and the family that reunited through love and forgiveness. What did you think of this transformation journey? Were you moved by the reconciliation between father and daughter? Was Claire's courage in intervening in such a delicate situation the right decision? Would you like there to be more places like Anne House in the real world? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. We love knowing where you're watching from and how these stories touch your hearts. Don't forget to leave your like if the story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that celebrate the power of family love and second chances.